No, I'm gonna keep it 100 with you. If Khamzat wins, it's a disaster. Actually, you can't tell me that a part of you is just like thinking this fight actually might not happen.
You know, Dean Thomas was dead on. A Khamzat Chimaev championship reign could be a total disaster for the UFC. He's not wrong to be worried, because I am too, to be honest. Khamzat's history of unreliability is such a massive red flag for the UFC and for the fans. And whatever division he's sitting on top of, whether that's 85 or 70 like he fought at one point, or light heavyweight like he's talked about before, Khamzat Chimaev sitting on top of any division in the UFC is a massive problem, massive red flag. Think about it. A champion who might not show up, might not make weight, and holds an entire division hostage, essentially, with inactivity. It's a recipe for a dead division, angry fighters, upset fans, and I am not looking forward to the possibility of him being champion. Don't get me wrong, the outrage from people like Dean Thomas, other people in the community, other fighters that Khamzat Chimaev has pulled out against, missed weight against, it's all legit, but it is like totally drenched in hypocrisy, because for years we've all watched the UFC not just tolerate things like this, but actively enable a fighter who is far more disruptive, far more damaging to the sport. A few of them, but particularly one. A fighter that makes Khamzat Chimaev's 7.5-pound weight miss against Nate Diaz look like a parking ticket. It's way past time that we have an honest conversation about the Jon Jones double standard. I've talked about this on my channel before. I know the community is split like 50-50 on Jon Jones, because there's a bunch of you guys still supporting him, but especially somebody like Dean Thomas that's actually connected to the UFC and works for them. If we're going to call Khamzat a potential disaster as champion, we need to take a look back at the recently retired UFC heavyweight champion, Jon Jones, and all the trouble that he caused for the UFC. The UFC is not real. It's genuinely not a real sport. No, it's not WWE, but it's definitely not a real sport. And the selective memory that a big portion of the fan base has in this sport is mind-boggling. And in this video, we got to talk about why this outrage or worry about Khamzat is so misplaced. I'm not saying it's incorrect or invalid, but it's just misplaced, because we're placing this on Khamzat Chimaev. At least some of the fan base was okay with the Tom Aspinall, Jon Jones saga being dragged out, or multiple other times that Jon Jones has left the promotion in a terrible position. Okay, but first things first, I agree. The Khamzat worry, the Khamzat problems are real. Nobody's going to deny that Khamzat is a risk on top of a pay-per-view main card, in a title fight, in any sort of big fight, especially one that doesn't have another championship fight on it. Like UFC 319 has Aaron Pico versus Lerone Murphy as the co-main event. And Dean Thomas saying that Khamzat winning is a disaster is actually totally right. Spot on. I'm not going to argue that point, because if Khamzat Chimaev becomes champ, you can basically say RIP to the UFC middleweight division. When he does show up, we can count on him for an exciting performance, usually a finish, a very fun fight. Khamzat is in fun fights. I'm not going to hate on him from a fighting aspect. He's one of the more entertaining guys, especially one of the more entertaining grapplers in the sport. But can we count on him to actually get to the fight? Can we trust him to make that walk 2 or 3 times per year as champion? That's the real question. None of us are going to forget UFC 279, supposed to be this Khamzat versus Nate Diaz type of grudge match. Nate Diaz literally being sent to slaughter against Khamzat Chimaev. The UFC just wanted to get rid of him. Instead, we got a complete circus. If you guys remember, Khamzat missed weight by like 7.5 pounds, and the card got rearranged so that the main event was Tony Ferguson against Nate Diaz. The co-main event was Khamzat Chimaev against Kevin Holland, and then the feature fight was Li Jingliang against D-Rod. When Kevin Holland was supposed to fight D-Rod, Tony Ferguson was supposed to fight the Leech, and we were supposed to have Diaz and Khamzat in the main event. Khamzat said that he could have made the weight and that the UFC doctor made him stop cutting, but we all know that that's not the case, because he moved up to 185 pounds after that fight. Obviously a catastrophic failure, similar to Arman Tsarukyan at UFC 311, literally the day before the event. And speaking of which, here's them actually hanging out with each other. Arman Tsarukyan and Khamzat Chimaev. They have a common bond. They have ruined a UFC pay-per-view main event on less than 24 hours notice. And random note, what the hell? This dude Khamzat's got some little feet. Both of them do. Let it be known, they got small feet. And you know what that means? But in a similar way to Arman Sarukian causing Renato Moicano to get a title shot and Beneil Dariush to be out of an opponent at UFC 311, Khamzat did the same thing at 279, causing 3 fights to get kind of thrown together that didn't make much sense and that the fighters weren't prepared for. And it really wasn't just Khamzat's weight miss that was the problem. Obviously, that is a massive problem. It was him walking up to the scale at weigh-ins, smiling, laughing.
178 and a half.
178 and a half, the official weight for Khamzat Chimaev.
And at the ceremonial weigh-ins as well, there was absolutely no remorse, wrecking a pay-per-view that the UFC put millions of dollars into promotion like they do. And that one moment right there did more damage to his professional reputation or fighting reputation than any loss in the cage ever could, just in my opinion. It planted a seed of like, is this guy unprofessional, undisciplined, or is he just this raw, wild talent just running all over the place and somebody needs to kind of like help focus him a little bit? Which I understand that argument too, but I truly think that he's just undisciplined. There's been plenty of rumors that he runs around with a lot of women, even though he's married. I'm just saying, these are rumors. These are rumors. But they're saying he runs around with chicks. There's videos of him trying to rizz up the huzz in the car, things like that, trying to show off that he's Khamzat Chimaev. And 279 wasn't really just like a one-off thing that made people die. It's not like some one time he made a mistake and now the rumors follow him everywhere. Reputation of missing weight and being unreliable follows him everywhere. His entire career has been plagued by totally unreasonably long layoffs. He had 3 fights in like 60 days once he got into the promotion, 3 wins in 60 days. I think 2 of them were 10 days apart. And from there, it was like, oh my God, he's going to be as active as Kevin Holland. And from there, he had health scares, a near-death battle with COVID-19, other pullouts. And it turns out that he's not as active as Kevin Holland. He ended up being about as active as Conor McGregor or Jon Jones. So I agree with this disaster narrative in terms of a champion from Dean Thomas for Khamzat Chimaev, because the division needs somebody that defends the belt actively, keeps the line moving. Next guy, next guy. Israel Adesanya, although his title reign is weak in hindsight. Marvin Vettori, Rob Whittaker the second time, not very good. Jared Cannonier. In hindsight, it's not the best title reign. Not as good as we made it out to be when he was actively defending the belt. He did continually fight. Same with Alex Pereira. We were seeing those guys every 4 months, every 5 months. DDP now staying pretty active. He fought in August last year, then February, and now August this year. So that's 3 fights out of Dricus du Plessis in 12 months as the active middleweight champion. We absolutely will not see that with Khamzat Chimaev, because when the champion goes dark, doesn't give us any updates on fights, doesn't have contracts signed, the fans are in the dark and the weight class stalls. They don't know what to do with all the other matchups, because you can't be really booking #1 contenders fights right away if the champ isn't going to fight the current #1 contender for a year and a half or for 9 months, 12 months, whatever it is. And although Khamzat was one of the most hyped up prospects that we've seen in quite some time, for me, that Nate Diaz miss was like the end of the hype for me. I was like, whatever, he's ruining events. This isn't the guy. Honestly, I have no argument against Dean Thomas in that regard, because that concern about UFC pay-per-views and big cards is a valid concern. And when you also pair it with the fact that he has ties to Russian warlord Ramzan Kadyrov, who's known for numerous human rights violations, war crimes, and all of that, that makes his ability to fight in the US very wishy-washy, depending on who's the U.S. president, because he's been able to get into the U.S. since Dana White is friends with Trump and Trump is currently president. But during the Biden era, he couldn't get into the U.S. Obviously, now he's been in the U.S. He's been in California training with Aaron Pico, training with Arman Sarukian, training with a few other guys, training with TJ Dillashaw's strength coach in L.A. I know about that. So he's here now. But what about when we have a different president? One that Dana White's not friends with. While the case of like unreliability against Khamzat's pretty clear cut, he's guilty. But let's flip the script and talk about not just the undisputed former heavyweight champion, undisputed former light heavyweight champion, but the undisputed biggest problem-causing fighter in UFC history. The man that has caused more chaos for UFC pay-per-views than any fighter in history, even more than Conor McGregor, Jon Bones Jones. And this is where that double standard is impossible to ignore because people are worried like me that Khamzat might or will hold up the division, but Jon Jones has actually done it in 2 weight classes for over a decade, considering scandals and criminal charges and all those type of things outside the cage to inactivity, ducking Tom Aspinall, failing drug tests along the way. For more than a decade, Jon Jones ruined 2 divisions. To be fair, Jon Jones never missed weight. Good for him. Never missed weight. But he's gotten stripped 2 or 3 times now, depending on if you're going to say vacate or stripped. But he's had it stripped on 3 separate occasions now for disciplinary reasons, whether it's drug tests or scandals. The only fighter in UFC history to get stripped of belts that much, besides Conor McGregor, who was technically stripped of the featherweight belt and then the lightweight belt. Jon Jones is the only one with more strips. In 2015, he got stripped of the light heavyweight title after he had the infamous hit and run accident where he hit and run a pregnant lady, broke her arm in the car accident, fled on foot, returned on foot to grab his weed and pipe and alcohol out of the car, and then fled again without assisting the woman that he hit in the car accident, the pregnant woman that he hit in the car accident. That main event was scrapped. The title was stripped. Ruined. Terrible look for the UFC, especially with him being their GOAT and the biggest star in the sport at the time. Then he came back and won the interim title against Ovince St. Preux. And then he was set to unify that with now holding the belt at the time, Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. One of the biggest rivalries ever at a century event for the UFC 200. Days before the fight, pulled for a failed drug test, of course. The biggest card in UFC history to that point lost its main event. He was suspended, stripped of his title yet again, and we got Miesha Tate versus Amanda Nunes as the UFC 200 main event. He returned again, beat Daniel Cormier to reclaim the belt. But that return to champ status for Jon Jones literally lasted a month before his drug test came back. He came back positive for an anabolic steroid. The belt was stripped and given back to Daniel Cormier. And for the 3rd time, he got stripped. So actually, the Jones-Aspinall saga that ended with vacating / stripped would be the 4th time that Jon Jones has lost a belt not in the ring. And so each of those obviously caused like a massive headache. They blew up entire divisions for multiple years at a time. They forced the UFC to cancel huge fights, ruin major events like UFC 200, create interim belts, and constantly clean up Jon Jones's mess to keep divisions moving and keep the sport moving forward. And that's not even mentioning the other arrests, cocaine tests, the time that they had to cancel UFC 151 because he wouldn't fight Chael Sonnen. There's an endless list of things. And while I do agree that the Khamzat concern is very, very real, I'm just trying to figure out what gives in terms of Jon Jones. Why is Khamzat's single massive weight miss and health problems being treated like the potential end of a division, ruining a division, disaster for the UFC, while Jones spending over 10 years ruining divisions left and right, beating women, failing drug tests, crashing cars, whatever it is, that everyone just goes, yeah, but he's the greatest ever. The answer's kind of complicated, and many people will have different opinions on this, but to me, it's about like the sustained long-term popularity and winning percentage essentially of Jon Jones, because although he was constantly failing outside the cage, he was constantly succeeding in the cage. Most consecutive title defenses, I think, youngest champ in UFC history, all of those accolades, and also Dana White wanting to have you as like the Michael Jordan of the sport, where we have a GOAT. Everybody can go, this is our GOAT. It buys you a lot of second chances, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th chances for Jon Jones. And the narrative shifts from he's a liability, he's crazy, anything like that, to he's just troubled. I think, like Joe Rogan says, I think you have to be like that a little bit to be such a great fighter. It's almost like the way people look at like troubled artists, where they're like, yeah, they do drugs and they beat women, but they make such great music. That's kind of the approach that a lot of UFC fans have for Jon Jones. They go, yeah, but he's still a GOAT though. I love Jon Jones. And second, we've all gotten used to it. Like, Jon Jones has an endless list of scandals and slip-ups. It's just another Wednesday. For Khamzat, that 279 miss was such a massive public screw-up, and he presented himself so badly, whereas Jon Jones is constantly like crying and bitching and moaning, talking about how he's trying to be a good father, trying to influence people positively. Khamzat was just like, hey, fuck y'all. And that's why people don't like him. And I actually, I respect Khamzat just being like, yeah, what's up, versus Jon Jones being like, no, I promise. I know I beat women again. I know I crashed a car again. I know I tested positive for steroids again, but I'm really just, we're born in sin, blah, blah, that whole thing, bro. That shit's tired to me. At least Khamzat's like, yeah, fuck y'all, what's up? I missed weight, haha, flipping you off, what's up? Honestly, we have to be real about the fact that there's entertainment value in Jon Jones's fucked up, twisted career story with all these different things. People gravitate towards that controversy. Controversy sells. No such thing as bad PR. And Jon Jones has lived that to the fullest. So while the UFC's publicly scolded him before, Dana said a bunch of bad things about him, there was text messages that came up in the UFC antitrust lawsuit that showed Dana saying some really bad things about Jon Jones. They also profited massively off of the attention that he got. And they enabled that because at the end of the day, troubled, scandalous Jon Jones was still making millions for the company, making hundreds of millions for the company. The hypocrisy is kind of all in the framing, because when Jones causes that chaos, it's Jon being Jon. When Khamzat shows being unreliable, it's a disaster for the division and it'll ruin the UFC. The sudden concern for the sport's integrity is pretty hollow when you realize that it was conveniently silent in the case of Jon Jones for years and years. So to bring it all back to the intro of the video, is Dean Thomas wrong? No, he's not. A champion that can't be trusted to make weight, show up, that's a disaster for a division, for the UFC, because the belt is the ultimate prize and the person holding it has a responsibility to the company, to contenders in the division, and to fans to come through, provide title shots for contenders, entertainment for the fans, and a return on investment for the UFC, investing millions into promotion for his events. And missing weight for a title fight, cardinal sin. The fight is no longer a title fight unless the guy that wins, or the guy that made weight, wins. We saw it. Yoel Romero missed weight in 2 title bouts. Charles Oliveira was stripped of the lightweight title because he missed weight technically. They make the sport less legitimate. They make the belt less legitimate. And it makes everybody look terrible. It makes the UFC look like they can't even control their own athletes. While Khamzat has created a lot of concern about his professionalism, and people are definitely valid in their fear that he could win this title and then hold a division hostage until next October. Especially because they've already announced Tom Aspinall versus Ciryl Gane for October in Abu Dhabi, UFC 321. Khamzat's not turning around in 3 months, and he's not a co-main event type of fighter. We probably won't see him until summer of next year or October of 2026 when they go to Abu Dhabi like they usually do for pay-per-views in October. That bothers me. But what bothers me more is like the selectiveness from the fans and the promotion as to like, oh, Jon Jones, no big deal. We'll still put him on Madison Square Garden, but Khamzat can't trust him. So is Khamzat going to ruin the middleweight division? Possibly. Probably, if he wins. His history of unreliability is legitimately like such a black mark on his career. If he becomes champion and doesn't show up more than once a year, or like not at all, it's going to create another logjam like Jon Jones did at heavyweight and light heavyweight, and hurt the credibility of the middleweight title, which has had some massive stars hold the belt. Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira, Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping, even GSP technically held it. One of the more prestigious belts in the UFC could be very quickly deteriorated by an inactive or even retiring Khamzat Chimaev. You have no idea what he's going to do. But for Dean Thomas to act like this is some unprecedented new threat, oh my God, it's a disaster. It ignores the history of Jon Jones that we've lived through. And the UFC made it through that just fine, even though they looked really dumb a few times. He was stripped of the belt 3 times, blew up multiple divisions, ducked his way from Tom Aspinall into retirement. And so the real disaster is not the one fighter, Khamzat Chimaev. It's the selective outrage from the fans. And when they choose their target, well, Khamzat definitely going to ruin this division if he wins, in my opinion. But it's a joke when you give Jon Jones like 17 free passes. The UFC has a reliability problem and a credibility problem right now. And that problem didn't start or end with Khamzat Chimaev. It's been festering at the top of that pound for pound list for like 10, 15 years. McGregor, Tito Ortiz gave them problems back in the day. There's always problems at the top when it comes to fighters. So what do you think? Am I off base? Is the Khamzat criticism fair? Or is it just a glaring Jon Jones double standard? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, please do me a favor, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. I'm Wyatt. This is Fight Society.